Greetings, YouTube. Today I'm going to review the latest movie my wife and I watched here at home, the widescreen Troy, and I actually like this in widescreen. I preferred it over full screen, and it was nice that I could pick it up rather cheap at Target. I have to say that so far, of the two Greek-themed movies that I've watched in the last few weeks, this and Alexander, I like this movie significantly better. I thought the pacing was much faster, the action was much more interesting. I have to freely admit that I prefer Brad Pitt as a main character as opposed to Colin Farrell. There were only apparently one bad Irish accent in this movie as opposed to a number of them in Alexander, and there just isn't any way I cannot compare the two. When this film was over and they rolled the director, whose name I actually didn't know, I turned to my wife and said, no, well, it's a good thing Oliver Stone didn't try to direct this one, because he would have made it slow and plodding. But for those of you that don't know, this is a interpretation of Homer's The Iliad, which is a story I actually haven't read in probably 25 years, maybe even longer. I'm not sure what year of high school I actually read that story, but I haven't read it since, though I have done research about the Greek culture since then, and in particular about some of the military tactics that were used in the time periods contemporary to the Iliad. And the basic story is boy with poor decision-making skills falls for a woman, steals her away, and starts a war, or at least is used as justification for a war, because, you know, someone who really wants to take over Troy decides that this is a great excuse to go attack them. And frankly, you know, it's no worse than most of the other justifications humans use for having wars. And one of the things I really enjoyed was just getting to watch Brad Pitt chew up the scenes. And that's what he does. He plays Achilles to the hilt. Achilles is pretty much a big dick, and he plays this to that type perfectly. My wife comments about that early in the film, like, wow, he's an ass. I said, yeah, you know, Achilles is pretty much a dick most of the time. He improves over the course of the film, as he does, I guess you could say he does in the story itself, but, you know, he's never what you'd call a warm and fuzzy person. He sees every situation in many ways like a nail, and he is a hammer. He's one of the greatest warriors that's ever lived, justifiably for that reputation. And that's how he solves problems, really. And I can appreciate that. It's good to see someone who is really good at something do what they do best. The choreography on the individual fight scenes was just wonderful. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I think one of the reasons I like this movie so much more than Alexander is it concentrated on the individual combat, and I like Arms and Armor, as anyone who has ever seen any of my sketches can tell you. And anyone who looked at my book collection, you can see that I see the weapon reference books I have. And it's just with fewer big, broad battles without anyone in them that was recognizable. So it's, you know, it's just generic warrior A fighting generic warrior B with the concentration on individual combat. It was much more interesting. And I have to admit, I thought the writing was tighter in this. It was more interesting. I mean, the first 10 minutes of Troy I found more interesting than the entirety of Stone's Alexander. So there you go. So I also think that this had an advantage in that there was a distinct story to tell. There was, you know, there's a plot, there's dialogue, famous dialogue. There is a climax, and in Alexander's story you don't have that. It's a story of his life, and that life peters out far too early, and then everything he creates falls to dust. So it just, you know, it's declining wedge as opposed to this, which goes out with a bang and creates a myth. And while Alexander was his legend became mythic as well, it didn't happen at quite the scale as the Iliad did. So I thoroughly enjoyed this movie. I think I'm probably going to do a few sketches based on some of the weapons and such I saw in the film. It was nice. My wife actually asked questions about the armor and things. She found some of that interesting. It was kind of nice. I could actually answer those questions. But yes, I thoroughly enjoyed Troy, and I recommend it to anyone that enjoys Greek era film. And I gotta say, I found it a whole lot more interesting than Alexander.